the human weaknesses, and that's not, I mean, they're weaknesses, but they're not human faults. Nowhere will you find, unless it's say from it says you should work on not having a desire for food. You want to work on not indulging in your desire for food, and not be, maybe eating for the right reasons, but if you have an appetite, then there's something wrong with your character. Just like Avino asks, Esav, Yaakov, whoever it was, please bring me delicious meals so I can give you a blessing. We Shabbos meals we're supposed to engage in. We don't have a mitzvah on Shabbos to be haughty. Like honor is not good on Shabbos. You should pursue honor. We never say that's okay. Right? It's not good ever. But food in the right context is appropriate. So on the flip side, things like honor and money, where we do say, if you have, you always want to double what you have. We do say that the pursuit of honor knows no limits. Those things are not found in the animal kingdom. And those are the things where, truthfully, we say the reason those things are so powerful and so infinite is because those really are expressions of the soul's desire for spirituality. Maybe your point about the monetizing, the Rishi would say, I remember that he would use the phrase, what drives mankind with such hellish fire? He said, go look, if you look at Manhattan and just take it in, and, we're used to it. But it's not hard to live out here in Suffolk County. You go for a walk in the woods and keep that picture in your mind when we used to walk through a national forest, unspoiled by human hands. Then look at Manhattan and ask yourself, but I tell you, Rishi would marvel when he saw an airplane passing overhead. Wow, up there in the sky. We have to maintain our sense of wonder and our sense of freshness. I do, like when I drive, I'm trying to have that off. When you do, it's mind-boggling. It's awe-inspiring. What's the driver of all that? Money, right? So, but he said, what the abilities are, that it's a human quest for spirituality. You can have a flock of cows, a herd of cows, and for a million monkeys and typewriters, for a million years won't produce Shakespeare. Right? They won't produce six and spot. They won't produce anything. Right? A million cows living in peace and prosperity for a million years won't build a single house. Right? They won't earn $1, and they'll never write a book. They'll never do it. But take human beings and put 3 people on an island, and they come back 20 years later. There'll be a house. There'll be a shul. There'll be a bank. There'll be right. 2 shuls got money. That's another thing that animals don't have, right? So look at Manhattan. What 500 years ago it was just an island. And where did all this come from? It's the human. It was all the force of all those human beings who poured their life into it. What was their life? Where did they get that ingenuity and the diligence, right? The imagination? Those are spiritual qualities. They're meant to be used for spirituality. Imagine if instead of building skyscrapers and office buildings and department stores and places of entertainment, they built shuls, they wrote svarim, they did they daven. That's what humans are supposed to be. We have to understand the power of the fire that's inside the human soul, right? If we're harnessed properly. Remember, Radolsky is saying that when the Mashiach comes, everything is for the Torah. What are we going to be doing? What are all those office buildings going to be used for? We're going to be packing lunches to send to the people learning in the yeshivas. So we have to recognize that is the story. So the story of human history is really, what is progress? Progress is the human spirit misdirected or undirected, not properly channeled. Remember the story of Rish Lakish and Yochanan? Rish Lakish was a bandit. Yochanan was very handsome. Yochanan was bathing in the river. Story in the Gemara. And Rish Lakish sees Yochanan, he leaps over the river in one jump. Now, I'm not sure if it's he leaps over the river in one jump. So Yochanan says, "Wow, you should channel that strength towards Torah study." So Yochanan looks at him. This is back in the day when people were like, they were Yochanan says, "You should channel your good looks for women." So Rabbi Yochanan says to him, they say like these people before they became great rabbis, they were powerful people. It was not directed. Yochanan says, "Well, I have a sister who's better looking than I am. You go study Torah, and I'll make a shidduch." So he does. He becomes Rish Lakish, the great Charusa and partner of Yochanan throughout the Gemara. You always find those two names. They often debate each other. He becomes a student and eventually his peer. Yeah, like a bandit, a highwayman. Yeah, a robber, like an armed robber, not a burglar, more like ambush people. So that was the story. It says that so he jumps over the river. He tells the rabbi, the rabbi says, use your strength for Torah. Use your beauty for women. And he says, okay, how about if you marry my sister? She's more prettier than I am. He said, okay. And said, then he tried to jump back over the river, but he couldn't. As soon as he made the commitment to study Torah, his strength, the Torah, I guess he uses up human strength. But the idea is that incredible potential, and sadly much of it goes unrealized. That's really, I think, the biggest tragedy is when the failure to achieve. Please point this out that I think that it's Lepetterberger makes this calculation based on the Chazal. People think of the most important thing is not to sin. I don't want to suffer the punishment, which is true. I mean, first do no harm. But he says the truth is, if you look at it, and I think he proves it, failing to earn one's reward through mitzvahs is a bigger tragedy, more painful to the soul than doing something wrong and being punished for it. Like a person has a choice. Also, I'll hide under the cover. It's kind of like, imagine, to make a kind of a practical application might be. I mean, people make this point, before we get to the practical application, because there are 4 people who never sinned and only died because all humanity is subject to the curse they were Amram, the father of Moshe, Yishai, the father of David, Kilev, who was the son of David, and Binyamin, the son of Yaakov. One of my men pointed out, all these people were less famous than the person that they were the father or the son of. Right? David was more famous than his father Yishai. Yaakov was more famous. So he made the point that the greatest people aren't necessarily the ones who are the most free of sin. The greatest people went out and did the greatest things, and maybe also made some mistakes along the way. But the trade-off, sort of getting out there and accomplishing more doesn't always being the most perfect and the most great and the greatest are not always the same thing. So again, I don't want to say it's a direct practical application when we talk about that idea about the Torah, right? So early about can you go out to North Florida and teach Torah, or stay in New York and get a safer job, quote unquote. You go out to a place, you're on your own, no support system to make kind of on-the-spot decisions in very compromising situations. Maybe you'll make mistakes, but look at the rewards. It's worth risking some mistakes in order to get those greater rewards. Kind of to put it kind of crassly. And that the Torah's calculation, the value of doing a mitzvah. That does not mean that you should do an avera in order to do a mitzvah. Most important thing is not to do an avera, and it's worth sacrificing. We have calculations, as we said last week. We don't blow the shofar on Shabbos, ever, even if it's Rosh Hashanah and it's a biblical mitzvah, because someone might accidentally carry the shofar by mistake a few feet in this thing. We say, why should everybody, all Jews, give up the tremendous mitzvah of the shofar, which is a biblical mitzvah, just because the person might inadvertently, and inadvertent is not a capital crime. Maybe he'll bring a carbon, maybe he won't even be liable. It might happen, it won't happen often, it'll happen to 1 or 2 people, individuals by mistake. Maybe it won't happen, but nevertheless, the rabbi said better we should eliminate the mitzvah just in those instances when it's on Shabbos for everyone, and it's an absolute definite. We're 100% sure no one will get this mitzvah because just that way we can be sure that no one will inadvertently, maybe possibly violate. So there is that calculation that our responsibility to avoid sin kind of, in a certain sense, takes precedence over our desire to do mitzvah. In a certain sense, although again it's hard to call it putting a stumbling block. If there exists a mitzvah, you can't blame anyone. The rabbis are proactively canceling the mitzvah, so it's the same line of thinking that you want to make sure that help people do the right thing, not to do the wrong thing. So I don't mean to say that we should say, well, let's just do good things regardless of the collateral damage, because it's I'll start a school and I'll expel a few students and ruin their lives, but the other students that stay in the school will do well. It'll be worth it. We don't calculate that way. If you think you're going to mess up one person's life, then don't get involved at all. But the point is that when you do act in good faith, do the right thing, and you do more mitzvahs, and it may, again, not intentionally, and that's not part of the plan, but Moshe Rabbeinu hit the rock and made a mistake. Israel. There are other people, he was not subject to the decree of the spies, right? He had outlived all of them and was ready to go into the land. And it would have gone with everyone else, except then he hit the rock and had to stay behind. Had he not been the leader, if he was I retire, it's been 40 years, I'm going to resign, he probably would have gone into Israel. But he was the leader, and he was in that position. He made a mistake. He wasn't given the choice about the leadership anyway. He probably would have resigned if he could. But the point is, being Moshe Rabbeinu, he was in unique situations of challenge, but it was still better than he was Moshe Rabbeinu, and that's why he's better than he was Moshe Rabbeinu and did all that leadership, even though he might have all the other Jews who we don't know by name did go into Israel, and he didn't come to hit the rock. Well, we're not told. The Torah doesn't have any instances of actual leadership. I think that it doesn't mean he wasn't. My assumption is that everyone, in Moshe Rabbeinu's time, the Torah tells us how he was advised by Yisro, and Hashem confirmed that they should have leaders of thousands, leaders of hundreds, leaders of 10, and that only happened later. But it's possible just we're used to that kind of thing. A very structured society full of leaders. That joke about the president of the United States, the Prime Minister of Israel, and he says, your country is very small. I am actually the leader of 300 million citizens. And the Prime Minister of the says, yeah, but I'm the leader of 3 million prime ministers. So that's kind of the way it is with Jews. But there was at least one story. The Rashi mentions the matters of how the Torah describes the marriage of, I don't say the names, but the marriage of a man and a woman from the tribe of Levi who then gave birth to Moshe Rabbeinu. We know that Moshe had 2 older siblings. So how is that possible? So it says, well, they were married, and when the Egyptians made the decree to throw the babies into the river, they separated. And then Miriam, the eldest, as you know, the prophet, right? Her father was the king of Egypt. The king of Egypt always had to kill the male babies. You don't have more children, there won't even be any female babies. What are you doing? So he said, you're right. And he remarried his wife, and they had Moshe Rabbeinu, who did not die in the river, as we know. Although he almost did. But what it says is, I believe that when Moshe's father made the decision to separate, a lot of other couples followed suit. And when he made the decision to remarry, again, a lot of people. So, there's an indication that it makes sense, as the father of Moshe Rabbeinu probably wasn't an ordinary person. He was one of the 4 most perfect people who ever lived. So it's not a surprise he would have had a following. Somebody would have recognized that this is a person worth it. Like in the yeshiva, there are some of them more popular, maybe because they're more accessible, some more certain personalities. But everybody has people that gravitate to them for some reason. Even the quietest, there's always somebody who recognizes that this rabbi can guide me.
That they were not famous leaders, because it would be much harder for a leader to die without them.
So I think I must have been making the same point. That maybe I used the word leader.
That's what I wrote down.
Yeah. Okay. So I think right. Well, it's true. They're not. None of them are certainly in the written Torah. None of them are identified in a leadership role. Again, David's father, also Tishah, I think it's clear he was a prominent citizen from a distinguished family in a distinguished town, but he wasn't the king. He wasn't the judge of his time, and that's not how we know them. We know them primarily as the father or the son of someone who's more famous. Okay, so.
That, you don't have to be great, just, I'm not such a great person, I'm such a leader, what am I going to accomplish, what am I going to do, who am I?
Right.
I can be a little person and still be...
You don't have to be a leader, right. The lesson is the other way as well, right. Okay, so basically, as far as Tishah B'Av is, the basics, so it starts at sunset. It's not a mitzvah like Yom Kippur to add. It's not like a holiday where we want to add, but you stop just enough time that you're stopping in time. You want to stop eating. There's no mitzvah like Yom Kippur. There's a mitzvah to add. To start a little bit early, like a Shabbos as well. There's no mitzvah to add to Tishah B'Av, but want to stop before sunset. At night, once sunset, well, so we have what we call the Suga Maseket, the final meal, which is supposed to be an intentional meal. In other words, the person, we're encouraged to eat enough that we can fast, that we can fast and make it through. So we're not supposed to starve ourselves in Eretz Tishah B'Av, eat adequately. But then there's supposed to be a final meal that's very Shabbat theme. So that's supposed to have just bread and one additional cooked food. People dip the bread in the ashes and then hug and sit on the floor for the meal, even though it's not Tishah B'Av yet. We don't have to sit on the floor in general, but just for the meal itself, people sit on the floor. And that's the kind of a symbolic meal to usher into Tishah B'Av. So that again, when we want to eat a decent size, you can eat a decent sized supper before that, and then just take a break and come back a little later, sometime before sunset, to eat this. Often the custom is to use the hard-boiled egg, which is the simple of morning. Once the fast starts, as you know, we sit on the floor. Something lower than 3 tzvachim, which is 3 tzvachim like 11 or 12 inches. So if a person can't, it's obviously medical, significant difficulty, physically hardship, has to consider something higher. But if possible, a person should sit on something low down, pretty much lower than that on the ground. That lasts until 1 o'clock on Thursday till Chatzot, which is the midday. And then from then on, we can sit on regular chairs. The other restrictions all last throughout the day. So those include, again, like a Yom Kippur, eating and drinking, washing. We only wash our fingers until the knuckles, so that's the entire finger, but not the palm of the hand, not the back of the hand. Any washing, as we know, is okay if it's to remove dirt or for medical reasons. So this person is a stain or is fall in the mud, you can wash any part of the body and even use soap if necessary. But if not necessary, only the fingers should be washed. That, creams or oils on the skin, unless it's for medicinal reasons, and no leather shoes. The davening, Tishah B'Av is pretty much weekday davening, but we do a couple of obviously things that are unique. So for the Ma'ariv on Wednesday night, there's nothing different about the Ma'ariv itself, but the custom is to read Eicha. It's one of the 5 Megillah. So Megillah Esther is one that's most famous. The other ones are Shira Shirim, the Song of Songs that we call them Pesach, Koheles, written by King Shlomo about meaning of life. We read that in Sukkot. Book of Rus, Megillah Rus, we read on Shavuos. And Eicha, which is about the destruction, it was written by the prophet Yirmiyahu about the destruction of the first temple. He predicted it and then lived through it and wrote about it. So we read that, it's 5 chapters, and we read that in the shul after Ma'ariv, along with a few kiddush, not many, but a couple of these compositions that were written in later years about the destruction. We also have, I think, Ubal Tzion at the end of the Ma'ariv. I'm not quite sure why. The morning davening is also like a regular Shachris, but interestingly, we leave out Tachanan. That's part of that odd-sounding idea, but I mentioned in Chazal, Tishah B'Av is called a moed, like a holiday. And just like on a holiday, we don't say Tachanun. We put our head down after Shemona Esrei, we leave it out. So on Tishah B'Av as well, we leave out that prayer. Other than that, it's pretty much the same as any fast day. So we regular Shabbos. So we have the Kriyas HaTorah. We have and a Haftarah reading. And following that, there's Kinos. So Kinos is done in the shul, but it doesn't need to be done in the shul. It can be done anywhere. It's basically done for the first half of the day. Doing it at the appropriate time, any time until midday. And it talks about not stopping in the middle, to kind of stay focused on it. In general, the first half of the day until 1 be particularly focused on the morning, so we avoid any activities that aren't directly related. Really just read Kinos and read about Tishah B'Av and think about Tishah B'Av. After 1 o'clock, it's more like a regular fast day, and we're supposed to spend the whole day with supposed to Teshuvah and morning, but people do go to work if necessary. Sometimes people, the rabbi and my parents would drive back to the mountain after you come in and do a program because you're going into Catskills with some it was strange when I was a kid, because as a kid, Rabbi probably sits in his room all day and that we're human beings. He needs to get back, so you can drive back to the capital if you need to. But as much as possible, the entire day, if necessary, right? Again, in general, activities, should be limited to things, as much as possible. I keep focused on the meaning of the day. And even the next day, if certain restrictions continue, I forgot it's a little different because it's a Friday. So, but until midday, I think swimming and bathing really goes till Friday midday. Hair cutting, I didn't write it down. It's in the newsletter. I think it says why not maybe wait till midday on Friday, because there's no really good excuse to preparing for Shabbos. I need to eat meat on Thursday night. It doesn't really work. But I think it says laundry is okay. There are some people who say that only if you need it for Shabbos. Other people say all laundry is okay, even on. I'm trying to remember where. Let me see if I can. Where was it? But I don't think there's any music until midday. I think so. 1 second. And a normal year, hair cutting and laundering would wait till midday, 1 o'clock on the afternoon. The reason was that the burning, they lit the temple on fire at the end of Tishah, but it burned mostly during the 10th day. And so we don't do 2 fast days because we focus on the beginning. We say that's the most severe time. So in principle, some of those restrictions, right, the Shulchan said, meat and wine continue into the next day, but not past midday. However, it says all this is permitted for the honor of Shabbos. So, and he's talking about laundering and bathing and hair cutting. Because some people say
that doesn't make sense. I don't think, if I'm saying it right, if I'm thinking right.
Right. But,
because you're allowed to wear fresh on Shabbos. Why would you have to wear laundry? You're allowed to wear fresh on Shabbos all the time. And if fresh on Shabbos, why would you have to wear laundry?
Well, there's no. Well, first of all, what if you happen?
100 years ago.
Yeah, look, it could be you need more clothing for Shabbos. A lot of people, I don't know. I saw an article somewhere, and it could be. It's always listening to reading articles, you don't know. Like they say, some say this and some say that. I think they had more rabbis who said that it wasn't an issue. It sounded like the consensus was that it wasn't really an issue. That you can wash anything that you need. But I think conceivably, it's not hard to imagine that you can say that. First of all, maybe your Shabbos clothing got dirty last Shabbos. During until Tishah, you can't do laundry, even things that you're allowed to wear fresh. Let's say socks. Right. You're allowed to wear fresh socks. You can't wash socks. Right. So maybe you use up all your socks, and now you need socks for Shabbos, and you got to wash. So if it were the 9 days, you'd have a problem. But if it's Erev Shabbos, you're allowed to when Tishah is over. And another restriction that applies all day on Tishah, but not past the fast, only until the end of the fast, is learning Torah, because Torah brings joy to except that you're allowed to learn Torah that's related to the theme of Tishah, so that's anything that discusses the destructions, stories, and whether there's stories in the Tanakh or stories in the Gemara or Midrashim, and anything that has to do with Teshuvah, so a book of Musar of any kind, things that are supposed to help us get to the point of the day are also permitted, and obviously the laws of Tisha B'Av, those are all appropriate material. And anything reading Jewish history, reading things, especially if it's the tragic parts of Jewish history, is all appropriate because of the theme of the day. The idea of the holiday, it's kind of cryptic and hard to understand, but I did read an explanation that made sense to me. It was, I think, in the name of Yerucham. He said that A moed means, as we know, a good time. That's the idea of it. In Judaism, the holidays are special times, and special times of closeness to Hashem. He said it would be difficult to conceive of why Tishah would be called a time of special closeness to Hashem, and that we would celebrate by not saying Tachman. However, it is still a special time, and there is something to celebrate. It's just, that is, we know, and this, if anyone has read this Tishah, we know this. The first step that a person needs to take in order to orient themselves in the past is to recognize, understand what we're here for and what we should be focusing on in this life. And the problem that the people have, the most basic attack launched by the Tishah is to get us not to stop and think about life, to be so busy in the daily flow of life that we don't even take the time to stop thinking. Like Paro did in Egypt when he tried to keep the Jews so busy working that we wouldn't even give them the straw. We never even stopped to think about what it might mean to be free. And that's what the Tishah says. Torah is here, so we got to start with learning Torah. Torah opens our minds and helps us start to think. So, if you think about the destruction of the temple, I'm kind of adding this in, but it's very interesting. And you can read this in Eicha itself and in the keynotes, and the prophets are warning them and warning them and warning them. And if you listen to Haftarah last year, Shabbos Chazon, the prophets are crying out, that's the vipers, people are all corrupt, and it seems like, imagine what people were doing, and the prophet standing there in the lectern and trying to talk to the people, and they're ignoring them, maligning the prophet, throwing them in prison, some of which happened, and then the destruction happens, and then so you imagine the prophet saying, "I told you so." We know that's not what happened. Yirmiyahu went in with the prisoners and tried to march with them, and he was just sharing their suffering. And they cry and they say, "Believe us." And he says, "I swear, if you would have cried once before this happened, then nothing would have happened." But when you read in Eicha, and one of the things that is coming up again and again, and you read in the keynotes too, the shock. How can it happen? Who would have believed it? Where did it come from? And it then talks about the righteous people, the blameless youth, and the venerable elders, and which one are we talking about? Before it happens, it's all about you corrupt, evil, and loathsome people. You're the worst people in the world. And after it happens, they're like, why on earth would God want to do this to such a wonderful nation? So I think the answer is they're both true. As we know this from Tanakh. If you read what happened, the golden calf, you think these people were the worst people on earth, but God chose them for a reason, right? We talk about it. Again, you can partly what you focus on. Torah focuses on the flaws, address them. Partly because because I know you, because I love you, because I care about you, I hold you to take you to task for everything. I hold you accountable. That's part of it. And Torah magnifies them. It doesn't magnify them so we can see them more clearly. And people are greener, the more is expected of them. They're held to a higher standard. The rest of the world knows it, right? But they're always holding us to a higher standard. But the point is that to a certain extent, there's some obliviousness that we're warning them, but they really didn't see it coming in a certain sense. And then it came. So clearly there were. Yirmiyahu was a prophet, and he wasn't the only one. But the nation as a whole, there are always going to be people who are righteous, people who are not righteous, and people who are. Yeah, maybe in some sense, in some cases, maybe they could have tried harder to help. In some cases, the nation as a whole is not worthy, and individuals who are not to blame maybe will get rewarded anyways. Hashem works those things out. The point is that there are times that we break out of our routine and celebrate our closeness to Hashem, and those are special times. There are times that we break out of our routine because we had a rude awakening, and we suddenly recognize how distant we are from Hashem. And that's also a reason to celebrate. Because if we're not doing either of those things, then we're just simply chugging along and totally unaware of Hashem. And that's the worst thing of all. And so sometimes you're driving, especially in the old days. Now, if you're driving anywhere, your GPS is on, and you just, but something you have to turn your GPS on, or you fall out of service, you don't realize it. So you're driving along the highway for, 43 minutes, and you suddenly realize that the GPS was turned off, and you missed the turn. Maybe you're going east instead of west. And all of a sudden you realize you're recalculating and it says, okay, go 43 minutes back in the direction. So the moment you realize that is a very, very unpleasant feeling. But as soon as you turn the car around, so every mile, 1 mile closer to where you need to be. So the best moment of the trip is the moment that you realize I'm going the wrong way. You slam on the brakes and turn around. That's what Tishah B'Av is. It's a day of celebration. It's a day when we recognize how far distant we are from Hashem, and then we can, as soon as you recognize that, that's the first step. A minute ago. A minute ago we didn't even realize it. All of a sudden that realization is the beginning of getting back on track. That's the
someone will say, the best time was the worst time wound up being the best one.
Right.
If it didn't happen then, if they nothing.
So that's it. So we have to try. And the fact that we're trying is the first step, and we have to recognize that. Because trying is infinitely better than not trying. Hashem recognizes that too. So we hope, that, and knowing the ending is very helpful. That when you have a book, and I don't know exactly, but I know that everyone survives in the end. That's you don't have to worry so much. So right, for the next generation, and Hashem we should be able to.